Welcome to another deep dive. So today we're diving into something that, it's one of those things, right? It can make a huge difference in your internet experience.
hmm
We're talking DNS.
Right.
That behind the scenes system that connects, when you type in a website, it connects you to the actual website.
Yeah. It's like the address book of the internet.
Exactly. And we found some really fascinating material on the V2EX forum.
Okay.
There's a user there, goes by Crazy Dia, and they claim to have built a zero maintenance DNS solution
Oh, wow.
using Cloudflare Workers. So that's what we're gonna unpack today and see if they've really, cracked the code here.
Yeah.
And more importantly, if this is something that, you listening might actually find useful.
Yeah, I'm always curious about these kind of DIY solutions,
Right.
especially when they promise things like zero maintenance. Gotta see what's really going on there.
Exactly. So one of the things I found really interesting about this post was how Krizadia kind of sets up the problem. They start by, highlighting these common issues that a lot of internet users face, especially those, dealing with international connections, different regions.
Right. Because not all DNS servers are created equal.
Right, exactly.
Depending on where you are in the world, your default DNS might not be the best option for accessing content globally.
Yeah, it's like trying to order I don't know, like food from a restaurant that's across the country.
Okay.
Your usual delivery service, it might not cut it, You might need something a little more robust.
Yeah, you need that extra coverage, that extra reach.
Exactly. And Presidia points out that, even those seemingly simple solutions like, oh, I'm just going to switch to a foreign DNS for everything.
Right. Which a lot of people do.
Right. But even that can lead to inefficient routing, right?
Exactly. You might end up taking the scenic route to get to a website that's actually right next door, virtually.
Exactly. And it's not just about, those basic workarounds. They even get into some of the more technical tools, like EDNS client subnet, for example.
Oh, yeah. That's designed for more precise location-based routing.
Exactly. But even that, they're saying it can backfire, especially if you're using a VPN internationally.
Oh, interesting. Because it's like your GPS trying to, navigate you to the coffee shop down the street, but it thinks you're in a completely different country.
Exactly. It's getting all this conflicting information.
Exactly.
So they're identifying all these pain points, right? And this is kind of setting the stage for their proposed solution. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think, at least from my perspective. They've built this custom DNS resolver.
Okay.
That they call DOE.
Oh, dough.
Yeah, DOE. And they've built this using Cloudflare Workers.
Interesting. So, are they basically creating their own little traffic cop in the cloud?
That's a really good way to put it.
Okay. I'm liking this already.
Yeah. So walk me through this a little bit. How does this traffic cop actually work?
So, from what I understand, whenever you make a DNS request, which is happening all the time, right? Every time you want to access a website,
Right.
DOE sends out not one, but two simultaneous queries
Oh, wow.
to Google's DNS servers.
Okay.
So the first query, it uses your local ISP's IP address as the client subnet, right?
Right. So your regular connection.
Exactly. But then the second query, this is where it gets interesting. It uses your VPN's IP address as the client subnet.
Oh, so it's like gathering intel from both your regular internet connection and your VPN connection.
Exactly. It's like it's doing a little reconnaissance mission.
Okay, that's pretty clever. So then what happens? It's gathering all this data. Then what?
So then this is where the real magic happens, right?
Yeah.
It takes those two sets of results and it compares them using GeoIP data.
Mm-hmm.
And it figures out, okay, which IP address, whether it's your local one or your VPN, is going to offer the most advantageous connection, geographically speaking, for that specific request.
So it's like having a super smart navigator that's constantly analyzing traffic patterns in real time and rerouting you to the fastest lane.
Exactly.
Even if it means switching between your regular internet and your VPN on the fly.
Exactly. It's trying to find those shortcuts, those little back roads to get you where you need to go faster.
Okay. That's a slick concept.
It is.
But we all know that even the fanciest GPS systems, sometimes they lead you astray.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So what are we seeing so far in terms of the potential benefits and maybe even some drawbacks?
Well, one of the biggest positives that Crizity emphasizes is is cost effectiveness. They're claiming that Doe, it leverages free tiers of several different services.
Oh, wow.
You've got GitHub Actions, Cloudflare Workers, Cloudflare D1, even MaxMind's database.
So all the big players, kind of?
Yeah, they're stitching together this really interesting solution from these freely available tools.
That's huge, especially for people who, they're looking for kind of like these independent solutions, right? They don't necessarily want to be tied to, some big company's paid service.
Right, and it challenges this assumption that you have to shell out, big bucks for high performance internet.
Yeah, that it has to be like a premium feature.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a big plus, but it makes you wonder, what's the catch? There's got to be a catch, right?
Right. And to be fair, they do highlight some limitations.
Okay.
One of the main ones being latency.
Okay, so that's the delay when you're waiting for a web page to load.
Exactly. And they mentioned experiencing around 200 milliseconds of latency.
Okay, so that's noticeable, but not terrible.
Not terrible, especially if you're getting this for free.
Right. Exactly.
But, that is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder if maybe paying for like a higher level of service, like, would that make a difference?
Right. That's the million-dollar question, or I guess the potentially cheaper with paid tiers question.
Exactly.
But, we'll have to see if Crizia addresses that later on.
Yeah, if they found any workarounds for that.
Exactly. But moving on from cost and potential speed bumps, Crizia also highlights the versatility of Doe. So even if your devices, maybe they don't directly support EDNS client subnet,
Okay.
Doe can actually work around that by embedding like parameters directly into the URL.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like having a universal translator for your internet traffic in a way.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty big selling point because no one wants to feel like, they're limited by their devices, right?
Yeah.
But speaking of limitations, let's talk about kind of the elephant in the room here.
Okay.
Complexity.
Right.
I mean, from what we've discussed so far, this doesn't sound like just like a simple settings tweak.
No, this is definitely not set it and forget it. This requires some technical know-how.
Okay.
To set up, to maintain. But before we dive into kind of the implications of that, I think it's time we explore the other side of the coin.
Okay.
What are the potential downsides that Crizia highlights, and what might that mean for you, the listener?
That's a great point. I mean, not all of us are comfortable, tinkering with code and certainly not cloud services and all that. So for those who are, like, is this something that they could realistically implement and manage on their own?
That's the key question with any kind of like DIY solution like this, right?
Right.
And while, Crizia does provide some instructions and kind of like a roadmap, they do acknowledge that it does require a certain level of technical, proficiency.
Okay.
You're essentially like configuring a custom DNS resolver on Cloudflare Workers.
Right.
Which might involve, delving into things like serverless functions and API integration.
So it's less about like flipping a switch and more about like assembling a custom engine for your internet connection.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Okay. And I can see how that might be appealing to some users, but maybe a little intimidating to others.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this level of customization, while potentially powerful, it also introduces another kind of point to consider, like what happens if something goes wrong.
Right. Even the best built engines need maintenance sometimes.
Exactly.
So what are the potential points of failure with a setup like this?
That's a crucial question when you're relying on a single custom built solution like this, right?
Right.
And Crizia is very transparent about the fact that they're using free tiers of these various services.
Right.
So what happens if one of those services, changes their policies,
right,
or experiences downtime, or, in a worst case scenario, shuts down completely.
Right.
You could be left kind of troubleshooting this complex system
right,
without the support of, a dedicated provider.
It's that classic trade-off, right? Like the potential for greater control and customization,
right,
versus, the responsibility of troubleshooting and maintenance if something goes wrong. It makes you wonder, like, how active is Crizia in the forum, like offering support updates?
That's a great question, and that's something that I think any user who's considering this approach should really investigate.
Right.
Is there an active community around this?
Right.
Is there clear documentation available.
Yeah.
Because those things can make a big difference in mitigating those potential risks.
Speaking of risks, there's another big one that comes to mind, whenever we're talking about routing internet traffic through a custom system like this, and that's privacy.
Right.
And, Cressida does mention this, briefly in the post. They acknowledge that you're essentially, as a user, you're trusting their code.
Mhm.
But what are the implications of that trust? Like, how should we be thinking about that?
Well, this is where things get really interesting, I think, from both like an ethical and a practical standpoint, right?
Right.
When you're using a custom DNS resolver, like Go in this case, you are essentially handing over the keys to your internet traffic.
Right.
Like every website you visit, every online service you use, all those requests are being routed through this system.
So it's not just about technical competence at this point. It's about like digital trust.
Exactly.
So what are some of the things that someone should be considering, when they're evaluating the trustworthiness of a solution like this?
Well, I think transparency is paramount here, right?
Right.
Like, is the code open source?
Right.
Can independent security researchers look at it, audit it?
Right.
Does the developer have, a track record of responsible disclosure for any vulnerabilities that are found?
Right.
These are all like critical questions to ask.
Yeah.
And then, even beyond the kind of the technical aspects, there's the human element too, right?
Yeah, sure.
Like, are there clear terms of service? Is there a privacy policy in place?
Right.
And, these might seem like details, but they really speak volumes about, the creator's approach to user trust.
Yeah, it sounds like due diligence is key here, even more so than with like a traditional DNS service.
Yep.
It's not just about, speed and efficiency at this point. It's about understanding kind of these potential trade-offs.
Right.
And making an informed choice based on your own like risk tolerance.
Exactly. And that's why I think, Crisidia's transparency about, potential downsides, it's so crucial.
Right.
Because it allows for, a more balanced discussion. It empowers users to really make informed decisions. And speaking of informed decisions,
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that, Crisidia isn't just presenting Doe as this like perfect polished product.
Right.
Right. They're sharing their experiences. They're sharing their thought process, even their struggles with the community.
It's like they're saying, look, I built this thing. Here's how it works. Here are the pros and cons. And here's what I'm still figuring out.
Exactly. And that kind of openness, I think, is really refreshing.
Yeah, it's great.
And it encourages a different type of engagement.
Absolutely. And that's where I think the real value of these deep dives comes in, right?
Okay.
It's not just about whether or not, you choose to use Doe or not. It's about exploring the possibilities, understanding the trade-off, and maybe even sparking, your own creativity.
I love that perspective.
Right. Because
Yeah.
it's easy to get kind of, caught up in the technical details, but ultimately it's about what does this mean for us as internet users, right?
Absolutely.
And it seems like Crisidia, whether intentionally or not, they're kind of highlighting this larger trend, this potential for, for individuals to really take greater control of their digital experiences.
That's a powerful observation. And this brings us to kind of the heart of what makes this deep dive, so fascinating.
Yeah.
The bigger picture implications, right? Like, what does it mean that someone with, the right skills and a bit of creativity can essentially build their own solution to a problem that lots of people face?
Right. It's almost like a call to action, isn't it? Like, what do you think? Is this a sign of ease to come?
Yeah. I think it really is. I think it's definitely a sign of the times, right? Like, these tools and technologies that were once only accessible to like, big companies or like really tech savvy individuals.
Right.
They're becoming more and more available, to anyone really with an internet connection and a desire to learn.
Yeah.
And Crisidia's work is a testament to that, right?
It's like the playing field is being leveled not by, regulations or institutions, but just by the sheer accessibility of these powerful tools.
Right. Exactly.
Which is exciting, but also kind of daunting at the same time.
It is because it really drives home this point that, we're not just passive consumers of technology anymore. We have the potential to be active creators and innovators.
Yeah.
Even if it's on a smaller, more personal scale.
And that brings us to, like, the real heart of the matter, which is, what does this all mean for you listening, right?
Yeah.
Like, it might be tempting to think, well, that's great for, Chris Adia and these other, like, tech savvy folks,
Right.
but, I could never do something like that.
Right. Right.
But what if that's not the right takeaway here?
Exactly. Exactly. I think the real lesson here isn't necessarily about, building your own, custom DNS resolver.
Right.
It's more about recognizing that solutions to even, these complex technical challenges,
Right.
they often start with a really simple question: what if?
Right.
Like, what if I could optimize this?
Right.
What if there's a better way to do this?
It's that spark of curiosity, right? That willingness to kind of like explore, experiment, that can lead to amazing things. And Chris Dia's story is a perfect example of that.
It is. And, they identified a problem.
Right.
They dove into like the technical weeds,
Yeah.
and they came up with this really creative solution. And I think just as importantly, they shared their journey with the world, right?
Oh, yeah.
It didn't just like, present this finished product.
Right.
They opened up the hood, so to speak,
Yeah.
and invited others to learn, to contribute, to be inspired.
That's a powerful message for all of us, I think,
It is.
regardless of our technical expertise. It's a reminder that the internet, for all its flaws, it's still this breeding ground for innovation and creativity and community-driven problem solving.
It really is.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe Chrysidia's work will inspire, the next generation of internet optimizers.
Right.
Or maybe it'll spark an idea
Yeah.
for a completely different solution to a problem that we haven't even encountered yet.
That's the beauty of it all, right? Like, the possibilities are kind of endless as long as we keep asking those what if questions and keep exploring this ever evolving landscape of the internet.
Well said. Well said.
Well, that wraps up another deep dive.
Good dive.
As we journeyed into the world of custom DNS, explored the potential of Cloudflare Workers, and hopefully, sparked some of your own what if questions along the way.
I thought
So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those internet connections humming.